think we're facing an interesting challenge in the disability sector at the moment, that as a profession we're just finding our feet really publicly in terms of what our role as speech pathologists is in dementia, and we're seeing that reflected in some of the work that Speech Pathology Australia is doing at the moment. But then if you're working in the disability sector, we're also, due to medical advances, now working with people who have an intellectual disability longer into their life, and we're identifying dementia in those adults, and we're really finding ourselves in very new territory. So this is, I guess, Vicky and I just want to present today a case study each of a little bit of work we've done. We know it's last thing on the first day of the conference, and you know, this isn't going to be heavy. This is a light case presentation. The only heavy bit, the only caveat to that, is I'm just going to go through some of our initial statistics. So, we know that people with intellectual disability, Rochelle showcased that this morning, have a higher rate of mealtime support needs than the normal population. And if we add dementia into the mix, we're just further complicating that situation and those that person's support needs. So if we have a look, Prue is absolutely right that more than 75% of people with Down syndrome, aged 65 and older, have a diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease. But I just missed that one bullet point there. Before we get to Down syndrome, I just want to note that the literature tells us that the overall prevalence of dementia in people with an intellectual disability is comparable to the normal population, except two exceptions. One very strong exception of Down syndrome, which I'll get to, and one milder exception of Fragile X syndrome. Now, with Fragile X syndrome, the difference being that some people with Fragile X syndrome will develop tremor ataxia syndrome, and that's characterised by mobility problems and mild cognitive decline later in life that can present itself as dementia. However, when we move to that very large exception and talk about people with Down syndrome, we're talking very real differences at a neurological level. We heard Prue saying about the 75%, but what I think is really noteworthy as clinicians is that there is an incredibly sharp increase in prevalence between 40 to 60 years of age. So research has told us that by the age of 40, almost 100% of people with Down syndrome who have died have the neurological changes in their brains associated with Alzheimer's disease. Now, not every single person with Down syndrome at 40 is demonstrating dementia, but they have the neurological changes. And the statistics are that at 40 years of age, 22% of adults with Down syndrome will have dementia. By 60 years of age, it's 56% of adults with Down syndrome. And then as you read on the slide, by 65 years of age, it's 75%. It's really significant stuff that if you're working in the disability sector, you need to be very aware of. Also, what's very pertinent in the current situation is that there is difficulty with diagnosing people with intellectual disability with dementia. That's for a range of reasons. So first of all, when it comes to Down syndrome, there's a range of comorbidities for Down syndrome that can misrepresent themselves as dementia. So that includes hypothyroidism and depression. As a lot of us would be aware, the current tests used for dementia, the skill base for those don't accommodate support needs that a person with an intellectual disability may have already had prior to having cognitive decline. And a lot of the assessments require a certain level of communication ability that not everyone with an intellectual disability has. So there's some real challenges, facing our sector in best supporting people with adults with intellectual disability who also have dementia, or more specifically, adults with Down syndrome who develop Alzheimer's. So they're the hard, cold facts of it all. Now we're going to go into the slightly lighter bit, in the sense that Vicky's going to present a case study of someone she's worked with, and then I'll present a case study as well.
I feel like I'm in a parallel universe. We've also developed an thickened ice cream recipe, which we've distributed. I work in a facility that is over 4 sites, 600 people odd, all who are ageing. So I think our youngest person is about 39 now, was 35, but that was a few years ago. So we pretty much have a unique population, if you like, where there's a lot of people with Down syndrome who are ageing, and we are certainly seeing that syndrome within that syndrome of dementia and some decline. The person I'm going to be talking about is a 63-year-old man. He was diagnosed with severe intellectual disability with rubella embryopathy. He was a listeriosis risk, so that meant we couldn't use any sources that had been opened. That's all that meant, really, in this context. He had a history of reflux, regurgitation, pneumonia, a long history of multiple medications, of psychoactive medication, and when I went to see him, he had a bit of a pill roll tremor, essential tremor going on. He also had total sight impairment. In 2010, he started to lose his mobility, in that he used to reportedly turn cartwheels, do a lot of spinning. He went from that to wheelchair for all mobility and hoist transfer, because he couldn't stand transfer. He was non-verbal. And did I say total sight impairment? I think I did. But anyway, he had total sight impairment as well, just for another overlay. He had a dementia assessment in 2012, and that was inconclusive. But at the same time, the young psychologist did a Down syndrome dementia assessment, and he came up as someone with dementia, but that, because he didn't have Down syndrome, they couldn't use that assessment for a diagnosis of dementia.
Sorry, I didn't show you the slide thing. It's just that arrow.
Thank you. Right. So the referral I first attended was in 2014. It was for unplanned weight loss, holding food in the mouth, and meals taking up to an hour and a half to complete, which was extreme. My diagnosis at the time was severe dysphagia, so there was quite a lot of anterior loss of saliva, food, fluid, oral stasis, multiple swallows, residue after the swallow, no coughing or anything like that. But yes, there was obviously severe dysphagia. I walked in to observe this first mealtime, and the carer was standing and had a dessert spoon, and they were giving them a thickened drink, which was something close to concrete. It wasn't moderately thick as prescribed, and just went whack. And 10 swallows later, that cleared, at which point I went, can you just go and attend to somebody else for a while? I'll just go and mix up a moderately thick drink. Okay, no worries. So I did that to the correct consistency, got a small spoon, got them to sit down, please, face the person. Okay, tap the teaspoon, not a dessert spoon, teaspoon. And that was like 2 to 3 swallows to get that bolus down. So it was like, okay, we're going to have to do something about this. My next piece of advice to the person was to only add sauce to one component of the meal, so only to the meat, say, and to keep all the tastes discreet and to offer them alternatively, like not two of the same, and don't mix them all together. Okay, so that was the what's the word? That was plan. Those were the strategies. There it is. It was a big word anyway. Those were the practical strategies, and I also asked the nurse unit manager to please do another dementia assessment for this person, and also to, at his next consult with the psychiatrist, perhaps there might be some sort of ameliorating medication, like something to deal with tardive dyskinesia, but I couldn't say that word because you can't say that word anymore. It's actually Parkinsonianism, and I think it's benztropine, and it asked him to explore those two possibilities. So that all went quite well. There was a lot of education that had to come out of that for the staff to be mixing the drinks properly, and I also consulted with the dietitian to start having some nutritionally dense, low volume feeds through the day so that we could, address the fatigue. So that all seemed to go quite well until June of the same year, and the similar difficulties. Basically, I decided that perhaps we should step it up a bit with the tastes. So it was the same thing of discrete tastes. We were doing, I was observing a meal. The person was doing all the things as suggested before, being seated, watching, making sure that there was no oral residue with a dry spoon to elicit a second swallow, all those good things. But came to the mashed potato, nothing happened, going, for 20 seconds, nothing's happened. So I suggested, okay, I'm going to go and mix up a citrus and a cranberry, and then we'll see what happens. So got the citrus, and after the mashed potato, a bolus of citrus, and it was instant swallow. So it was sort of like, oh, okay, the research is not lying. It's actually, you can actually see it work, which was great. So devised a protocol, which was something like that. And it was quite hard for people to accept, so I had to do quite a bit of education that it is okay to give someone something as weird as one spoon of food and then a spoon of cranberry or orange, that it's okay. Of course, people like to make judgments about what they'd like, kind of thing. So yeah, I had to do a lot of persuasion. And I also had to urge the resident unit nurse manager to please, can we have a dementia assessment? Because we're not allowed to refer amongst our colleagues. We have to go through the nurse unit manager. So that appeared to work really, really well till the following June. And in the following June there was a re-referral, but unfortunately I had to go on leave, so I had to do a handover to my colleague, who after trying to stimulate that, swallowing, basically nothing was working. Absolutely nothing was working. And at long last, there was a dementia assessment and he was diagnosed with late stage And because he was diagnosed with late stage dementia, that's a terminal diagnosis, so we could then do a palliative care plan, which meant that nobody had to make him eat or drink or anything anymore, which was his choice, I think, because he really just wasn't opening his mouth for a start, and also anything you put in there just came back out again. So for the last 2 weeks or so of his life, he was nursed in bed for comfort, in the recovery position, so that all his, saliva ran out. He wasn't made to get up or do anything, and so he passed away in his bed that he lived in. And at that point, I felt that we had done the right thing, absolutely the right thing. But it is very hard to get people to not give food or fluid. It's really difficult. It's a very, very difficult thing to persuade a carer that it's better for that person if they don't eat or drink now. Yeah. But to the, the merits of the present situation, the palliative care team was an interdisciplinary team of clinicians and medical staff that already work there, and it was able to be implemented. Yeah, and like I said, I feel like I'm in a parallel universe because all of the things that Prue was talking about, we've been experimenting with over the last 2 years, and it's great stuff. I love Flavour Creations. I don't have shares in the company, but people often ask me if I do because I recommend it so often, like, low volume, high nutrition, consistencies that are consistent, which is great, and yeah, definitely recommend Flavour Creations. Thank you.